Hello, hello. Happy Friday to all of you. At least that's when we're recording. Today's recorded lecture will be the terms and principles. This is found in chapter 4 of the Working with Young Children. Okay. All right. So let me pull up the PowerPoint for us. The PowerPoint will be found under Files on Canvas. Oh, how do I get to that? Here we go. I had to move that little bar there. All right, slideshow. Slideshow. Come on, from the beginning. All right. All right, here we go. All right, let's start with some important terms, okay, that we're going to be using throughout the semester. The first is age. Our age is determined by the chronological amount of time we've been alive. That seems obvious, right? A 4-year-old has been alive at some, between 36 months and 60 months, right? No, 36 and 48, whatever the amount is. It's the chronological, I don't do math, the chronological amount of time a child has been alive, okay? Development means change or growth that occurs from utero through adulthood. So utero being in the belly or during pregnancy, all the way through adulthood into the end of life. We're developing, okay? So the reason that I talk about these two things as different is the age, the amount of time we've been alive is not the same thing as what our developmental age is often, okay? So a lot of times we talk about 4-year-old development, and so it's important for us to understand that development, not all 4-year-olds, not all 3-year-olds, not all 2-year-olds are at the same place developmentally. So they're, a 3.5-year-old is the same age as another 3.5-year-old, but their development could look very different, okay? We're going to talk in this class about what we typically see for each age, but it's incredibly important for us to know that every person's different, every person's development happens at a different rate, okay? Every person's development, every child's development happens at their own rate, okay? Development happening earlier is not necessarily better. It doesn't necessarily make someone smarter, more talented, gifted, okay? Development happens at everybody's own rate, okay? We should not be hurrying child to learn things sooner, do things sooner. We shouldn't be teaching them walking or crawling. Those things happen. Every child's development in that area will happen at their own rate, okay? The other term is stage, okay? This is the area of development that each child goes through as they grow and mature, okay? So most theorists believe that children go through stages of development, okay? So there are areas of development that a certain child is in as they're growing and maturing, okay? So while the rate of which they're going through development is different, the pattern or order of stages is consistent, okay? So again, like I said, a 4-year-old child may not be in the same stage of development as another 4-year-old, okay? But what is consistent across the board universally is the order of which children go through stages. So the rate is different, the rate varies, but the order is consistent. Okay, children have to develop certain skills before they can do the next set of skills. For instance, children, babies have to work on their core strength so that they can hold up their head before they can sit up on their own. So certain things have to happen in one stage for them to move on to another stage, okay? What that means is growth is on a continuum. One thing has to happen before another thing has to happen, and then that has to happen fully before the next thing happens. And that is across the board in every area of development, okay? So again, because we know that children go through stages and they have to fully develop everything that they need in one stage to be able to move on to the next stage, children are not better, okay? Earlier is not better. Okay? It is really important for us to know that children need as much time as they need, or we should be giving children as much time as they need without hurrying to go through each stage. That way they fully have everything that they need to be able to move to the next, okay? So trying to get a child to do something earlier is not better. It can actually harm them physically, cognitively, emotionally, if we're trying to force their bodies or their brains to do something before they're actually ready. Okay? So that's the first set of terms. All right? Ready to move on? All right. So here are some of the development principles. So throughout the semester and starting actually in a few weeks, we're going to be looking at the development of the typical development that we find in each age group, okay? And we'll be looking at the development in 3 areas, okay? So for each age group, 0 to 6, 6 to 12 months, 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, all the way up until school age, we'll be looking at the 3 basic areas of development for each age group: the physical development, the cognitive development, and the social emotional development. Okay, so it is incredibly important that through this lecture, discussion assignment afterwards, that you get a really as strong as possible understanding of what each of these areas of development are and what they mean, okay? So the first area of development is physical development, okay? So for every age group, we will look at where typically developing children of each age, what their physical development would look like, okay? The definition of physical development is how a body grows, what a body can do, okay? Physical body changes, that's physical development, okay? So it's development in bones, vision, hearing, weight, muscle growth, okay? That's all physical development, okay? There are 2 types of physical development we will look at specifically. We will look at gross motor development, and we will look at fine motor development. So for every age group, we'll look at the development of gross motor or large muscles. Okay, same thing. Gross motor, large muscle. Okay. So gross motor development are the large muscles, like the legs and the arms. Okay, our legs and our arms. Okay. Now, as those large muscles develop, the gross motor muscles develop, it allows our children to develop what's called gross motor skills. Okay? Gross motor skills are things that use the large muscles. Okay? So take a moment and just think about what are some gross motor skills that children do, they are able to do because of the development of their large muscles, the legs and the arms. If you said things like crawling, climbing, jumping, picking up large items, running, did I say running? Riding bikes, skipping,
Throwing.
picking the others.
Throwing.
Okay, steering a bicycle would be a gross motor development because you use your arms. Okay, so those are gross motor skills that children are capable of doing based on their gross motor development. Okay. I'm letting Jessica catch up.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So fine motor development is the development of our small muscles. Okay. Small muscles like the muscles in our hands and fingers, wrist, feet, toes, even our eyelids are small muscles. Okay. So those are our small muscles or fine motor development. When those muscles develop, it allows our children to have fine motor skills. So what do you think are some fine motor skills? Think about that for a minute. What are some skills children can do as their small muscles develop? If you said things like writing, picking up small items, pushing buttons, cutting, those are all skills that children can do based on how their small muscles are developing. Okay? The last two principles that are important for us to know in regards to physical development has to do with the direction of which our body grows. These principles are important to help us understand and provide developmentally appropriate expectations. Okay? We need to know that children develop from the head down. That's cephalo-caudal principle. Children develop from the head down, right? So even in utero, the first thing that develops is the brain, right? It's head down, the brain, then the spinal cord, okay? If you think about the size of a baby's head, right, in context of the rest of a baby's body, the head is much bigger, right, in context, because we develop from the head down, okay? And from the middle or the core or the spinal cord out. That's proximo-distal, okay? So we develop from the head and the spinal cord or core out. So keeping that in mind, what are the last muscles to develop? The last muscles to develop are our fingers and our feet and toes. Okay? These muscles, these finger muscles, these small muscles in our fingers, they're not fully developed until children are 7 or 8. Okay? So when you consider the progression of fine motor skills like writing and cutting in the context of how that child's muscles are developing, the rate at which their muscles are developing, it would be an developmentally inappropriate expectation to require a 2 or 3-year-old to write letters. Because a 2 or 3-year-old's only been alive, their chronological age is 24 to 36 months. And these muscles, think about how chubby your fingers are at 2 and 3, right? These muscles are not ready for that, okay? They should be given lots of opportunities to develop the core muscles, the large muscles, because those are the ones that are developing first. All right? So to keep that in mind, okay, just to recap that. Okay, physical development are how our body grows and what our body can do. Okay. Gross motor development is the large muscles, and as our large muscles grow, it gives us the ability to develop gross motor skills like running, jumping, skipping, climbing. Our fine motor development is the small muscles. As those small muscles develop, it gives children the opportunity to exhibit fine motor skills like riding, poking, picking up small items, our pincer grasp. And then the cephalo-caudal principle. Cephalo is directional, but caudal means brain, right? Caudal means brain. So cephalo-caudal principle is from the head down. Proximo-distal, proximity, which is close. Distal, which is distant. So close to distant, that principle that our body develops from the middle or the spinal cord, the core, out. Okay? That is physical development. The next area of development is cognitive development. Cognitive development is not the same thing as brain development. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Cognitive means thinking, okay? Thought processes, okay? It's the development of our intellect. Not necessarily intelligence, but the ability to think, the ability to gain knowledge, okay? So cognitive development is the thinking and understanding, and that changes as we grow and develop, okay? How a typical 2-year-old thinks is very different than how a typical 6-year-old thinks, right? That changes as we grow. So for every age group, we'll talk about what we typically see for the thinking or the cognitive development of each age group, okay? The last of the 3 principles is the social emotional development, okay? And almost always in our field, they group these things together, but they are 2 different things, okay? They are 2 different things. Social development is how you interact with others, right? How you express yourself, how you engage with others, okay? Emotional development is how you recognize your feelings, your self-esteem, your identity, how you process things. That's emotional development, okay? So just to kind of give you an idea what a healthy social development, right? A healthy social development in early childhood helps an adult who can communicate well, listen well, be patient, show tolerance to other people, okay? Now, a healthy emotional development allows, in early childhood, a healthy emotional development in early childhood becomes an adult who has a positive self-esteem, handles stress really well, communicates their feelings really well, processes their feelings really well, shows empathy, understanding, has a strong identity. So if someone tries to make them feel bad, it doesn't affect how they feel about themselves, okay? So you'll see the reason that these 2 things are grouped together, oops, I don't know where that is. The reason that these 2 things are grouped together is because feelings that we have about ourselves, our emotional development, is reflected on how we treat other people, which is social development. I don't know if you've ever heard the term hurt people, right? So children who are hurting emotionally, who may have been neglected or damaged, their self-esteem has been damaged, they've been, had some trauma, that affects how they treat other people, right? Even as adults, if we can't fully process trauma, it affects how we treat people, okay? So that's why those 2 are always connected, because the feelings that children have about themselves will be reflected in their behaviors towards others, okay? So social emotional development shows in how children trust, their confidence in themselves and their world, their ability to be a friend. Okay, those are examples of social emotional developmental skills. All right. So those are the 3 principles that we're going to be going over throughout the semester. Okay. Physical development, specifically fine motor and gross motor, cognitive development, and social emotional development. Okay. In your first Canvas discussion, you will be asked to describe these or define these in your own words. Okay. So when Jessica and I go through the Canvas discussions, if we see that you just reworded my description, we will ask you to do it again. Okay. Because if you can explain it in your own words, that leads to a deeper understanding. Okay. All right. So let's move on to something else that's really important in regards to some terms and principles. I want to talk for some brain development. Okay. Again, this is different than cognitive development. Okay. Cognitive development is the thinking, right? What the brain does. This is the actual physical development of the brain. Okay. Typically in our face-to-face classes, this would be a group assignment, and then we would come together and answer these questions. So let's see how it works doing it that way. I mean, obviously I can't assign you as a group to do this, but we'll go through and I'll just answer these questions, okay? So when, again, this is in chapter 4. If you want to go to page 97, that's where this information can also be found, okay? So if you look at the book, when does the most rapid brain development happen? It happens in the first 3 years, okay? In the first 3 years, okay? At birth, our brains weigh about 1 pound, okay? And is incredibly underdeveloped. The biggest amount, the largest amount of brain development happens in the first 3 years. But it's not fully developed. Brains are not fully developed until the late 20s, possibly early 30s. And for guys, it happens later. Okay. That's just the physical development of the brain, okay? What are examples of inherited and environmental factors that influence the physical development of the brain? You might have heard the terms nature versus nurture. Okay, nature is the inherited influences. Nurture are the environmental influences that affect brain development. Okay, so some examples of inherited brain development. Let's see if I can find it. Is things like, my goodness, my brain just left. Inherited factors are things like eye color, but the ones that affect brain development are things like addiction has been seen as inherited. Can you think of any, Jessica? I don't know why my brain just left me.
Well, it's more like genetic influences. So even like hair color, inherited like chromosome
exactly
issues, things like that.
Exactly. So those are the genetic or nature. Sorry, my brain completely blanked out there. Environmental or nurture factors that influence brain development are things like nutrition, stress, addiction also, love, things like that, things that happen in our environment. Our the adults in our life choose for us for the most part after we're born. So which do you think is more important for the developing brain, in particular in utero and in the first 3 years? Things that we inherit or environmental factors? Nature or nurture? Which one do you think is more important for the developing brain? Well, what science has shown, it used to be that it was one or the other, but really what science is showing is that they're both equally important, okay? The things that we inherit, the genetic makeup that we get from our adults affect brain development in as much as sometimes more than the environmental factors, or the environmental factors can influence our brain development as much as or more than nature. It just depends on the person. So it's impossible to say that one is more important for developing the brain. They're both having both of them be healthy and positive as possible is incredibly important for developing brain. Okay? All right, Jessica, I hope you were able to make sense of all that.
Yeah.
All right.
We're good.
Okay, so when we talk about the physical development of the brain, there are parts that I want us to know about. This picture seems like a lie. It's the only picture I could find that was a good image, but you don't need to worry about all of those words, okay? The only things that you have to worry about is the neuron, which you can't see there, but you can look at the nucleus. That's the center of the neuron. The dendrite and a synapse, okay? So this whole thing, can you see my cursor, Jessica?
Yeah.
Okay, this whole thing, those are neurons, okay? What is a neuron? They're message carriers, okay? They receive information. We're born with billions. We're born with billions. We're actually born with all the neurons we need. Once we're born, we won't develop any more neurons. We'll get rid of some, but we won't develop any more. Okay? So neurons are message carriers. Okay? They receive the information and they want to do something with it. Okay? When they receive the information and they have the information, they have to connect, right, with other neurons so that they can tell each other what to do with the information, okay? So those connections happen through dendrites, which are like the wiry kind of things coming out of the nucleus, okay? These things right here, these are dendrites, okay? They have to connect to other dendrites. When they connect, a synapsis is made, a synapse. The synapse is the most important thing, okay? Because if neurons don't connect, thinking doesn't happen. So a neuron standing alone is carrying information, but we don't develop the ability to think unless those neurons connect. So the connections are called a synapse. Okay? So those connections, or the book calls it the wiring of our brain. So if you think about when you connect a computer to a speaker, or your computer to a keyboard, or a computer to your monitor, you have to connect them with wires or they don't do anything, right? So they're important on their own, but they can't do anything in there unless they're connected to other things, okay? So that wiring in a brain is called a synapse, okay? So that our ability to think is when those synapses happen. How do those happen? How do synapses get made? How are connections made? Well, they're made when we have life experiences, okay? When children interact with the world, neurons connect. So when children have positive interactions, when they have life experiences, when they interact with the world, when there's stimulation going on at an early age, children are, their brain, their neurons are able to make connections, which allows thinking to happen. So if you look on page 98, these links are a result of the children's interaction with the world. They influence the ability of a child to learn, solve problems, get along with others, control emotions. All of those can only happen, those of thinking process, those thought processes, right? That can only happen when connections are made, when neurons connect, okay? So the child's growing brain responds each time provides stimulation, positive, especially positive stimulation. And this stimulation can be in the form of talking to them, holding them, singing to them, reading to them, right? When that stimulation happens, their growing brain responds by forming new connections. Okay? So the number of connections that children make depends on their environment, the care that they receive. Okay? A lack of stimulation, a lack of being talked to, being shown love, being held, means a lack of neuron connections, a lack of synapses, and that affects development. Okay? That affects a child's ability to think, right? To be able to talk, to be able to solve problems, to be able to learn. Okay? So connections, those synapses are made from positive stimulation. Okay? So to answer that last question, what do children need in early years for optimum brain development? I hope you said positive stimulation, right? They need caregivers who engage with them, who respond to them, have eye-to-eye contact with them, love them, talk to them, read to them, sing to them, etc., etc. Now, I don't really want to end with something negative, but you do need to understand that there is a difference in how the brain makes connections and responds when the stimulation is negative versus positive. Okay? So if children consistently receive negative responses, okay, I already said that if they don't receive responses at all, if they're neglected, then connections won't be made. This, what I'm talking about, is receiving a lot of stimulation, but it all being negative, or the majority of it being negative, right? Like overstimulated, harmful stress, being allowed to cry for long periods of time, not being talked to, not being held. I mean, I could go on and on, but I think you understand what I'm talking about. Negative responses, right? Physically and emotionally, negative responses over and over and over again will cause two things. One, cortisol is developed, right? Which is a steroid that we automatically develop when we're stressed. And it can be good if the stress is limited and not long-standing, right? That can actually propel us to respond, right? So if we are walking down the street and we see something that scares us, cortisol is developed and it allows us to respond, fight or flight, freeze, right? But in childhood, over and over and over again, if their brain is responding to stress over and over and over again, and cortisol is continually being developed, that actually keeps our brain, our connections from being developed healthily. And so it will affect, it will lead to things like memory and regulating emotion, right? It will lead the connections to be made, but not here in our frontal cortex, our frontal cortex, where we do the good thinking, like problem solving, and our language is developed, and we're able to process our emotions. This is where that happens. When there's a lot of stress, connections are made, but they're made back here in what's called the amygdala. You don't have to remember that. But this part of our brain, that's the amygdala, A-M-A-G-G-Y-L-A, that is our fight or flight part of the brain. So our prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain that's important for thinking and thought processes, where our good cognitive development happens. The amygdala is where the fight or flight happens. And so when children are in trauma or stress for long periods of time, their brain makes connections there. And so what happens often is, even if you maybe try to love on a 3-year-old who has only received, or for the most part received, trauma and stress, they can't even respond well to love, because they're used to their brain is used to responding from fight or flight. Okay? So they will respond from the reptilian part of the brain, the amygdala. Okay? So our job as early childhood providers in their earliest years is to provide positive stimulation. Okay? especially in this utero and 0 to 3, when the highest amount of brain development is happening. It's also the optimum time for brain damage, right? For our ability, our children's ability to process information and have good decision-making skills and communicate well and have a positive identity and self-esteem. You know, it is said that children in most part at age 3 are who they are for the rest of their life. That is because of the brain development that happens. So I think that that ends this lecture on terms and principles, okay? So like I said, so the other part of the discussion, the Canvas discussion, is for you to be able to explain why, I believe it is why positive stimulation in early years is important for brain development, okay? So do remember to use the terms and vocabulary that we used in lecture and that's in the textbook. If you Google the question and you come up with an answer that's using terms and vocabulary that we haven't used here, we're going to challenge you on that. Don't use terms and vocabulary that you don't know what they mean. Okay? Okay? So we're going to be looking in both question number 1 and question number 2, terms and vocabulary that you found here in this lecture in PowerPoint and in the textbook. All right? I think that's it for today. We do plan on having office hours on Monday the 20th. We'll put this up right away. You should be able to have a weekend to go over it. I hope that you do. That way you can have questions and answers for us on Monday the 20th. Anything else, Jessica?
No, I think that's it.
All right. You guys have a great day.
Okay, thank you.